Harrowfield Grand stood like a tombstone against the October sky, its once gleaming Art Deco facade now a patchwork of mildew and peeling paint. Sarah Chen pulled her rental car into the cracked asphalt parking lot, the headlights sweeping across a sign that read, "Condemned, no trespassing." She killed the engine and sat in the darkness, second-guessing her decision to come. The email had arrived 3 days ago, unsigned, but somehow knowing things only her grandmother could have known. Room 237 awaits, it had said. The corridor remembers what you've forgotten. Her grandmother had worked as a seamstress at the Harrowfield Grand for 40 years before it closed in 1987. She died when Sarah was 12, taking secrets with her that Sarah had spent the last decade trying to uncover. The hotel's lobby doors hung off their hinges, revealing a yawning darkness beyond. Sarah clicked on her flashlight and stepped inside, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The beam caught glimpses of former grandeur. A chandelier lying shattered like ice, velvet curtains rotted to threads, a reception desk covered in a thick layer of dust that looked undisturbed for decades, except for one thing. A brass room key lay on the counter, polished and gleaming as if placed there moments ago. The tag read 237. Sarah's hand trembled as she picked it up. The metal was warm, impossibly warm, as if someone had been holding it. She swept her flashlight across the lobby again, but she was alone. The elevator shaft gaped empty, its cables long since removed, so she took the stairs. On the second floor, she found it. A corridor that seemed to swallow light. While the rest of the hotel was merely dark, this hallway was something else entirely. A darkness so complete it seemed solid, like looking into the depths of an ocean trench. Her flashlight beam simply stopped at its threshold, as if hitting a wall. Room 237 was 3 doors down on the left. She could feel it calling to her, a pull in her chest like homesickness. But as she approached the edge of that impossible darkness, she heard something that made her freeze. Footsteps, not from ahead or behind, but from within the darkness itself. Multiple sets, pacing back and forth, accompanied by the whisper of fabric and what sounded like muffled sobs. Sarah forced herself forward. The moment she crossed the threshold, her flashlight died. The darkness was absolute, pressing against her eyes and skin like velvet. But she could see something else now pale, flickering shapes moving in the black. As her eyes adjusted, or perhaps as the corridor allowed her to see, the shapes resolved into figures. They were translucent, like old film projections, playing out scenes in perfect silence. A man in a business suit stood over a desk, signing papers with shaking hands. A woman in a wedding dress sat on the floor, tearing up photographs. A child hid beneath a bed, while shadows of arguing adults gesticulated above. And then Sarah saw her. Her grandmother, young and beautiful in her seamstress uniform, stood before a man Sarah didn't recognize. Money changed hands. Her grandmother's face was streaked with tears as she handed over something wrapped in blankets, something that moved. Sarah's knees buckled. The baby. The family secret that had torn everything apart. Her mother's older sibling, sold to pay debts. The child her grandmother had spent the rest of her life trying to find. The regret that had hollowed her out from the inside. The phantom grandmother turned, and for one horrible moment, Sarah thought she could see her. But the figure walked through her, replaying its eternal loop of sorrow. As she passed, Sarah felt it, the crushing weight of her grandmother's regret, so heavy it seemed to press the air from her lungs. Other figures emerged from the darkness. A bellhop who had ignored screams from a room, a manager who had covered up a death to protect the hotel's reputation. Guests who had come here to end affairs, abandon families, make deals that destroyed lives. The corridor was thick with them, each trapped in their moment of moral failing. The brass key in Sarah's hand grew heavier with each revelation, as if absorbing the weight of every regret it witnessed. The corridor wasn't just showing her these scenes, it was feeding on them, growing stronger with each loop of shame and sorrow. Sarah fumbled for the key to room 237, desperate to escape the suffocating pantomime. But as she reached the door, she saw another figure forming in the darkness. This one was different, clearer, more solid. It was herself. She watched her phantom self standing in a hospital room, unplugging machines while no one was looking. Her father, brain dead from the accident, but still technically alive. Until she had made the decision, the family couldn't. The decision she had never told anyone about. The machines went dark, and her phantom self walked away. The corridor had found her regret, pulled it from the depths where she had buried it. Now it would play here forever, another ghost in the hotel's collection. Sarah realized with creeping horror that this was why people came to the Harrowfield Grand. The corridor didn't just show regrets, it trapped them, and their owners with them. The key in her hand was burning now. Room 237's door stood before her, and she understood it wasn't an escape. It was an invitation to stay, to join the eternal performance. Through the keyhole came a soft light, warm and inviting after the oppressive darkness. She could hear her grandmother's voice, singing a lullaby Sarah barely remembered. But there were other sounds too, scratching, like fingernails on wood, like everyone who had ever entered that room trying to claw their way out. Sarah turned to run, but the corridor had changed. It stretched endlessly in both directions now, lined with doors and filled with an ever-growing cast of phantoms. Her own specter had multiplied, showing not just the hospital room, but every moment of guilt she carried, the time she had laughed at a classmate's stutter, the friend she had betrayed for a promotion, the lies, small and large, that had shaped her life. The darkness was seeping into her skin, making her lighter, more translucent. She could feel herself beginning to loop, her movements becoming repetitive, automatic. Soon, she would be just another player in the corridor's endless show. With the last of her will, Sarah threw the key into the darkness and ran, but every door she passed burst open, revealing more corridors, more phantoms, more versions of herself. The hotel had become infinite, feeding on regret and growing larger with each soul it claimed. The walls seemed to breathe around her, pulsing with the collective guilt of everyone who had ever walked these halls. She could hear their thoughts, feel their shame as if it were her own. The barrier between self and others was dissolving, and she understood that this was the corridor's true hunger. Not just to display regret, but to merge all guilt into one endless, suffocating mass. Sarah's feet were becoming heavy, her pace slowing despite her desperation. She looked down and saw with horror that her legs were beginning to fade, becoming see-through like the phantoms around her. Days later, Sarah's rental car was found in the hotel parking lot. Security footage from a nearby building showed her entering the ruins, but never leaving. Police found no sign of her inside, though they reported an unusual cold spot on the second floor and a persistent feeling of being watched. Detective Raymond Price had seen a lot in his 20 years on the force, but something about the Harrowfield Grand case unsettled him deeply. The temperature reading in that second-floor corridor was consistently 15 degrees colder than the surrounding area, with no explicable cause. His partner, Detective Lisa Chen, no relation to the missing woman, claimed to hear whispers when they stood at the corridor's entrance, though Price heard nothing. The corridor waits. It's always waiting, and sometimes, on quiet nights, guests at the apartment complex built next door report strange sounds from the direction of the old hotel. Footsteps pacing endlessly, muffled sobs, and occasionally, just barely audible, the sound of someone singing a lullaby that breaks off into screams. The building manager of the adjacent complex, Thomas Wright, had started keeping a log of complaints. They always came from tenants whose windows faced the old hotel. Always at night. Always the same description. Sounds that shouldn't exist coming from a building that had been empty for decades. Room 237 remains locked, but the key appears sometimes in pawn shops and estate sales, warm to the touch and impossible to throw away. It finds its way to those who carry unbearable secrets, promising them closure, but offering only eternal performance. The Harrowfield Grand was demolished 6 months after Sarah's disappearance. But the workers reported something odd. No matter how much of the building they tore down, they could never seem to find the end of one particular corridor. It seemed to go on forever, disappearing into a darkness their lights couldn't penetrate. Construction foreman Miguel Santos still had nightmares about that job. We'd mark the walls for demolition in the morning, he told a documentary crew years later, and come back to find our marks had moved, like the corridor was shifting, protecting itself. 3 of my guys went in to check the structural integrity and came out, different, quiet. They all quit within a week. The demolition company eventually brought in industrial floodlights, trying to illuminate the corridor's full length. The lights failed one by one, bulbs exploding in sequence as if something was moving through them. In the brief moments of illumination before each failure, workers swore they saw figures standing in the darkness, watching. They paved over it eventually, built a shopping center on top. But the stores in that section never prosper. Employees quit, claiming they hear things in the walls. Customers report feeling watched, judged, as if their every failing is on display. The Starbucks lasted 6 months. The bookstore, 3. Even the dollar store, that cockroach of retail, capable of surviving anywhere, closed after employees refused to work the evening shift. They all told the same story: shadows moving in the stockroom, whispers in the walls, and an overwhelming feeling of guilt that intensified the longer they stayed. And sometimes, in the security monitors, guards see figures that shouldn't be there. Translucent people in outdated clothes, pacing the aisles, playing out moments of shame and sorrow. They always check, but they never find anyone. Night security guard Janet Morrison had worked the shopping center for 2 years before she saw her first phantom. It was 3 a.m., she recalled, and I'm watching the monitors like always. Then I see this woman in a 1950s dress standing in the middle of the food court. She's just standing there, holding something, crying. I radio my partner. We go check. Nothing. But on the playback, she's still there, still crying. Every night, same time, same spot. The security company installed new cameras, upgraded their system, but the figures kept appearing. Always in the section built over the old corridor. Always translucent, always trapped in loops of regret. The company stopped hiring for night shifts after 3 guards had mental breakdowns, claiming they'd started seeing their own ghosts on the monitors. The corridor persists. It doesn't need the hotel anymore. It has transcended physical space, existing wherever regret runs deep enough. It appears in dreams, in reflections, in the corner of your eye when you remember something you'd rather forget. Sarah is there now, part of the endless show. She stands in that hospital room, hand on the plug, forever caught in the moment that defined her. But sometimes, for just a second, she breaks the loop. She looks directly at whoever is watching and mouths a single word: run. But by then, it's usually too late. The corridor has already found what it's looking for, and the performance must go on. In the years that followed, urban explorers would occasionally claim to find entrances to the corridor in other abandoned buildings: a mental asylum in Ohio, a boarding school in Vermont, an old theater in London. Always the same pitch-black hallway, always the same ghostly pantomimes of regret. The online forums were full of warnings and testimonials. Users with names like Survivor Dark Hall and Never Go Back 237 shared their experiences. The stories were remarkably consistent. A corridor that shouldn't exist, darkness that ate light, phantoms playing out scenes of shame, and always, always, the feeling of being pulled deeper. Don't bring guilt with you. One post emphasized in all caps. It feeds on guilt. The more you have, the stronger IT pulls. Dr. Marcus Webb, a paranormal researcher, theorized that the corridor had become something like a spiritual parasite, feeding on human guilt and spreading through the collective unconscious. He spent 3 years tracking reported sightings, mapping what he called nodes of manifestation. His research revealed a pattern. The corridor appeared most frequently in places with dark histories, sites of injustice, tragedy, or systematic cruelty. It was as if human suffering had worn thin the barrier between worlds, allowing the corridor to push through. Each new manifestation was stronger than the last, capable of trapping more souls, feeding on more regret. His research ended abruptly when he disappeared during an investigation of an abandoned mortgage office in Detroit. Security cameras showed him entering a darkened hallway on the 3rd floor. 2 hours later, they captured a translucent figure in the same hallway, repeatedly signing foreclosure papers, with tears streaming down its face. The figure looked exactly like Dr. Webb. His research notes, found in his abandoned car, revealed his final discovery. The corridor wasn't just appearing randomly. It was following ley lines of human guilt, major financial crimes, environmental disasters, social injustices. Wherever collective regret reached critical mass, the corridor would manifest. The last entry, scrawled hastily, read, "It's not hunting us. We're calling it. Every unconfessed sin, every buried shame, every regret we can't face, we're building it a road." The Harrowfield was just the beginning. It's spreading because we're feeding it. And I've fed it too much. I can feel it pulling me. I know I shouldn't go to Detroit, but the guilt, my God, the guilt of what I've hidden, the truth about the Harrowfield Grand's corridor, began to emerge through scattered historical records. The hotel had been built on the site of a 19th century courthouse where a notorious hanging judge had sent dozens of innocent people to their deaths. Judge Cornelius Harrow had been found dead in his chambers in 1889, surrounded by the case files of everyone he had wrongfully condemned. He'd written the same phrase thousands of times on every surface. I see them all. The land had been cursed long before the hotel's foundation was poured. The corridor was not a creation of the building, but something that had always existed there, waiting for the right structure to give it form. The hotel had simply provided it with walls and doors, a physical shape for something that had been feeding on regret for over a century. Local historian Emma Rodriguez had spent months in the archives, piecing together the true history. The courthouse had been built on a Native American burial ground, not the Hollywood cliché, but a specific kind of sacred site. The indigenous people had called it the place where shadows eat, and had used it for a ritual of unburdening. Guilty parties would walk a sacred path, confronting their misdeeds, finding absolution through acknowledgement. But Judge Harrow had perverted this sacred ground, using it for false justice and judicial murder. The spiritual mechanism designed for healing had been twisted into something that consumed rather than cleansed. The corridor was the corrupted remains of that ancient path, no longer offering redemption, but trapping souls in eternal loops of unresolved guilt. Marina Volkov, the last surviving employee of the Harrowfield Grand, broke her silence on her deathbed in 2019. She had worked the night shift as a cleaner and had learned to avoid the second floor entirely after her first week. The management knew, she whispered to her granddaughter. They used it. Rich guests would pay thousands to walk the corridor, thinking they could leave their guilt behind. But you can't abandon guilt. You can only transform it or be transformed by it. Those who entered either came out hollow, having lost part of their soul, or never came out at all. The corridor would whisper to you, she told her granddaughter, who recorded the conversation. It knew things, secrets you'd never told anyone. It would promise to take them away, to let you forget. But that was the trap. Once it had your regret, it had you. I saw so many people go up to that floor and come back, different, lighter, like part of them was missing. And some never came back at all. Marina's voice grew weaker as she continued. There was a ledger. The manager kept it locked in the safe. Every name, every date, every disappearance. Politicians, celebrities, business tycoons. Anyone with enough money and too much guilt. The hotel made a fortune selling absolution that was really damnation. She revealed disturbing details about the hotel's final years. Staff turnover was extreme. No one could work there long without being affected. Some employees reported seeing their future regrets, things they hadn't done yet, but would. The corridor didn't just feed on the past. It could taste the guilt that was coming. Room 237 was the worst, Marina whispered. That's where it started, where Judge Harrow died. They say if you went in there, you didn't just see your regrets. You became them. Forever. The recording captured her labored breathing. Then one final revelation. The night the hotel closed, it wasn't because of bankruptcy. Something got loose. Something that had been growing fat on all that guilt for decades. The corridor stopped being passive. It started hunting. The recording ended with Marina grabbing her granddaughter's hand with surprising strength. Promise me, she said, if you ever see a dark corridor that doesn't belong, don't go in. Don't even look. It's still out there, still hungry, and it's spreading. 2 weeks after Marina's funeral, her granddaughter received a package with no return address. Inside was a brass key, worn smooth with age. The tag read simply, 237. She threw it away. It came back. She buried it. It appeared on her nightstand. She drove 200 miles and tossed it in a lake. The next morning, it was in her coat pocket, warm as a living thing. The key was more than metal. It was a contract, passed down through contact with the corridor's victims. Each person who held it was marked, destined to either feed the darkness or join it. Marina had carried it for decades, keeping it from claiming others, but death had broken her hold. The granddaughter, Alice Volkov, tried everything: priests, mediums, occultists. None could break the key's hold. One medium, after touching it, screamed and ran from the room. She later sent a message: "That key is a beacon. The corridor knows where you are now. It's patient, but it's coming. Your only choice is when, not if." The corridor had marked her, claimed her through her grandmother's confession. She began to see it everywhere, in the gap between buildings, in the space under stairs, in shadows that fell too deeply. Always waiting, always patient, she held out for 3 months before the weight of carrying the key became unbearable. Friends said she'd become paranoid, jumping at shadows, muttering about dark hallways. She quit her job, sold everything, and drove across the country, trying to outrun something that existed beyond physical space. But you can't run from regret. It follows, patient as gravity, certain as death. Her social media posts became increasingly frantic. Photos of normal hallways with captions like, "It's getting darker," and "I can hear them whispering." Friends reached out, worried, but she stopped responding. Her final post was just a picture of the key with the words, "I understand now. It doesn't want the key. It wants what the key opens. And what the key opens is me." On a rainy Tuesday night, security cameras at a motel in Arkansas captured her walking toward a section of the building that didn't appear on any blueprint. She had the key in her hand. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m. At 3:18, the cameras glitched, showing nothing but static and darkness. When they cleared, she was gone. But in the static, for just a frame, there seemed to be shapes, figures moving in formation, playing out their eternal scenes. And one of them looked very much like a young woman, standing at a motel room door, key in hand, forever caught in the moment of her surrender. The motel manager found only one thing in the morning: the key, placed neatly on the front desk, still warm to the touch. He threw it in the dumpster. By noon, a new guest had found it and turned it in, saying it must have been left in their room by mistake. The motel was demolished within a year, after a string of disappearances. But truckers passing through that stretch of Arkansas still report something strange. Sometimes, usually in the hours before dawn, they see a building that isn't there, a motel that was torn down, with one section darker than night itself. Trucker forums are full of warnings about mile marker 237 on that particular highway. Don't stop, they say. No matter how tired you are, no matter what you see. The Phantom Motel is a trap. Jack Morrison had been driving trucks for 30 years and didn't believe in ghost stories. Until the night his 18-wheeler broke down at exactly mile marker 237. As he waited for the tow truck, he saw it materialize, a motel that shouldn't exist, with a vacancy sign flickering in colors that hurt to perceive. He could see figures in the windows. Some paced endlessly. Others stood perfectly still. One seemed to be writing the same thing over and over on the glass. And in the office, a young woman held a key, offering it to anyone who would take it. They've learned not to stop, no matter how tired they are. They've heard the stories. They know about the corridor. But knowing doesn't always help, because everyone has regrets. Everyone has that one moment they'd give anything to change. And the corridor is patient. It can wait. It has nothing but time and an endless hunger for the guilty.